Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of the 4400, a great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I'll also bring up the fact is, I've never seen a lot of the original 4400. I don't think I've ever seen an episode all the way through from the original. But when it was originally airing, I caught fragments of it. But all I knew is that these were people who would miss. I don't even know if I remember. I don't know if that. I guess that's probably true to the original series as well. I'm sure they're like changing some of the characters and maybe making maybe it's the same characters, just different actors playing them all these years later, or maybe they're just new characters. Maybe the names are completely different. I know obviously the time frame is completely different. I think I didn't know that element of they're from different points in time. I don't know if that's something they just did for this one. Whatever the case may be, I kind of knew about them having powers, but that's about it. I know very little about the series, but it is interesting, and they kind of jump on it really quickly. Obviously, you get introduced to, because it's interesting, because I know they released all these different trailers for all these different people, all these different characters, like Andre, obviously Shanice, she's our perspective into this situation. So I'm assuming it's kind of going to be that Lost thing probably going forward. You'll spend time with characters, part of the episode will be rewinding and explaining how they got to where they are. Probably more so with I'd say Lost, but also that Lost / Once Upon a Time thing. I'll probably focus on the more central characters first, but then later on, as you get introduced to other characters, you'll find out their connections and all of this. And I'm assuming that's how it's going to go. But it took a couple minutes before we got Shanice sucked up into the air and just everything went down. So we only got her perspective this episode. We don't know what the shortest amount of time frame is. From what we can tell so far, it seems like she has the shortest time frame of it's been 16 years for her. Who knows how long it's been for her. There's a girl that's she seems she's I want my phone. I think they said her name, wasn't it LaDonna? I don't know what. At first I felt like she was from a more recent year, because she feels almost she feels more modern. So she might be we don't know the full time frames of what time. We know the Reverend's from at least the 90s maybe. The Doctor got to be from maybe the 20s or 30s or something like that. 20, 30s, 40s, maybe something in that period. So it's unclear though the time frames. But currently Shanice seems between her and LaDonna, they seem like they might be our more recent one. Maybe our potentially Manny, which we'll get to that later. So it is the interesting thing of them being held captive. Obviously, this is this Belle mystery of what, because obviously social service workers Keisha and Jarrell were brought in. I mean, well, Keisha has the benefit of her girlfriend Jessica is connected to it, so she was able to get Keisha a position here. But obviously, it's interviewing these people about what's going on. Obviously, it is 2021, so you do know that. I'm curious, how they're going to play that. Whether it's pandemic reasons why they're masked up, or is it just because, well, we don't know. But it's interesting because a lot of these people are, because that's a whole thing too. Because they end up looking into people's medical records, and it seems like everyone's kind of fine. And I'm curious, is it going? It's that conversation about going through time, and does obviously it made modifications to people. So I wonder, are they immune to modern day diseases or something like that, just because of whatever has changed in them? Is that one of the characters in particular? She has a strong healing factor and is getting stronger every time. Either it's just naturally getting stronger, or the more she heals, the stronger it gets. But I wonder if that because usually with the healing factor that also means diseases can't hurt you either, because they'll halt any disease. So I wonder if she have a special kind of immunity, which can be an issue. That's why they're keeping it super hush hush about having powers, because the last thing you want is people in power to know that you actually have powers, because then that leads to very X-Men situation of being experimented on and people trying to replicate, especially her power. You can heal from anything potentially. So it's let's take that and see if we can use that to help advance modern medicine even more, or something like that. But obviously it's because Shanice is the only one we really got insight into her life. So learning you just had a baby, you're trying to track down your family. Try to go to where her family was before the last time she knew where that they moved, and turns out someone else is living there. She tried to, stayed with the lady who was her name, Miss Grover, who actually used to take care of her when she was younger. Part of me was almost hoping, like, okay, Shanice would keep the same clothes on, because it's that way. It's like, I'm literally wearing the same thing I was 16 years ago. How do you explain that? Because it's enough time where it's like, she doesn't have to, like, you're in that age of where you're an adult where, like, even after 16 years, you won't have changed a lot. Obviously, like, you had the big difference of, like, Mariah being a baby, and now she's, like, a full-grown teenager, But the moment she changed clothes, I was like, yeah, it's probably not going to be as easy to kind of continue that story. I mean, he could, no one's going to believe, like, wait, you just popped out of nowhere. Especially when it introduced the element of Shanice, when Miss Grover was like, oh, I'm glad, I didn't know you were going to be a little bit like your dad. She's like, I'm nothing like my dad. So it sounds like her dad walked out of her life. And now the sad thing is Logan thinks she did the same thing, to the point he got remarried. It sounds like he said, like, 9 years later. So he waited at least. That's something. But I mean, for you, it doesn't mean anything, because it's like, for Shanice, it's like, that was just yesterday. He was like, I found your letter. She's like, no, it's not what you think. And we find out she couldn't connect with Mariah at first because she felt like just something was wrong, and it sounded like she actually was going to leave. But I think because she's like, right, my head wasn't on straight, so I got help. But I think it probably, there was like, and sometimes that happens, I think, like, because, postpartum depression is a thing. So, but and that probably plays and lends itself, because probably Logan knows that about her, of like, right, like, your dad left, so you did the same thing. So that's probably why Miss Grover brought that up, because probably the word was that she up and left Logan and their baby behind. So it's like, now you find out, like, what your husband thought she left you. Your daughter grew up never knowing you, probably also believing that you left her. Now someone else has kind of raised you like a mom. It's like, but the thing is, Mariah isn't so against it. She's like, wait, Dad, like, she actually wants to talk to Shanice, because it's like, she's at least trying to hear her out. Logan isn't. So it's sad that, once again, just that instance of realizing, like, your entire world is turned upside down. Obviously spending a little time with our other characters. It's interesting how you had someone like the Reverend be able to calm people down, and he was just kind of like, something strange going on. Like, why don't we just kind of, like, kind of extend an olive branch, actually get these good people something to bed to sleep on. And Andre's kind of, I believe Andre's the doc, or is he the Reverend? I can't remember. I'm confusing a lot of the names. But the doc is saying, like, oh, like, it's good that we have someone like him, but our healers, our the one with the rapid healing, she's kind of like, yeah, I don't know. She's like, I'm married to a man like that, and it's like, they're the most dangerous. So, and the moment she's saying that, and the moment he's got that influence, and everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm like, oh, I see what kind of character arc you're gonna have. You're gonna be the what, like, this definitely seems like one of those situations where, like, oh, factions are formed, and I think he's going to lead one, because he's like, oh, like, he's going to be talking about God, and, like, I can tell later on, oh, God gave us these powers, we are God's chosen. There's going to be that, plus he's charismatic enough, so very, almost like a cult. He's going to go from probably Reverend to cult leader to a certain extent, like, being able to sway people to his side and his beliefs. So I think you could definitely see him be like the kind of faction leader. It's interesting too, because, like, obviously this is on the CW, which the original series was on the USA Network. But this being, the 4400, and there was also the 100. So, and I'm sure you can definitely draw parallels, obviously very different circumstances, at least that we know of, because obviously the conversation is now, like, later on, the Pentagon is looking into whether or not this is extraterrestrial, because it's like everyone talking about they've seen green lights. They're all from different places, different times. It's like, like, there's no common connection between any of these people. What I thought was interesting, and who knows how this all plays out, but Mildred seems like she's more like, either she discovered what she can do, because she ended up helping Shanice. She turned the cameras and then she unlocked the door. So either she already knows what she's capable of, or, like, that happened, like, when she popped up there and she's like, oh, I can do this. And then she used it to help Shanice. I thought that was interesting. And she's like, later on, she's like, oh, old people are super far out. And I'm like, all right, that sounds like some 70s lingo. So she might be a 70s child, a flower child. If I'm using that term right, because weren't flower childs like what they called each other, like, in the 70s and stuff? I don't know. I could be talking from ignorance, but it's definitely, like, when you look at her, like, she kind of has, like, that, like, very, like, 60s, 70s, like, quote unquote hippie feel to her. Like, so I thought that was interesting. But I also thought, like, the kid who we believe to be Manny, like, stopped her because he saw her using her powers at one point. So I'm like, does he, like, they must have maybe found out together that they had powers because he knew what she was doing and he stopped her because she was making, like, cause one of the police officers started, like, getting very testy and, like, had his baton out and she was about to, like, use it against him, but it's like, stop. Because the whole point is, like, because the doc was like, that whole conversation between him and LaDonna and the other lady were like, we probably shouldn't, like, let anyone know what we're capable of. Like, that could always turn very bad, you know? And our healer, she tried to, like, spice things up and make everything a little bit more enjoyable by playing some music and everyone's dancing, you know, having fun, at least lifting up their spirits a little bit until that dude started power tripping, being like, all right, that's enough. It's like, is it that big of a deal? Like, what's the problem? He's like, get in line. The shift changes for dinner or whatever. So I was like, oh, okay. Because the problem is you've got some power tripping cops there too. So that's the problem. But at the same time, you also have, like, the Jarrell and Keisha situation where Keisha is more, like, by the book of, like, we don't know what this is. Jarrell's kind of leading a little bit more with heart, but we kind of find out why. His brother Manny went missing, and he says, like, that time his brother went missing, he thought he saw a green light, but he hasn't been able to find his brother amongst anyone. So now he's scared of, like, what if I, you know, it's because when it comes to failing the people that you care about most, then you, it makes it a little easier when it's just, you know, taking care of strangers, because that way you don't have to, like, because you feel like you failed the people that are closest to you, so you put up a wall. It's kind of what Keisha talks about, because she brought up her sister dying in a car accident 5 years ago. Wasn't it a car accident? She said, like, no, I forgot. I'm sorry. I was confusing that with something else, from a different show. She was referencing her sister died in, like, essentially a drive-by. Like, she wasn't the target of, like, the bullets, but she died regardless. So, but it's like both of them wanting different things of, like, because Jarrell was the one that was kind of saying, like, right, like, we know, like, he's like, you could be a good person. The people you work for could be a good person, but that hasn't stopped good people from doing bad things in the justification of, or they're doing it for the sake of others. So it's like, you can end up doing some very bad things because you think you're doing it for the right reasons. So that's why he wants to be careful about the situation, he wants these people kind of treated respectfully and just right, especially because he was talking to someone, I don't know whether Jasmine is a friend who, like, because she might be another fellow, social worker that got pulled into all of this. I wonder, did Jarrell, like, the moment he heard about all this, decided to jump on this, that he know what he was getting mixed up in? Because it wasn't until he heard about the green light from Shanice, he's like, wait, the green light? Like, that's what he thought he saw. So I could be mistaken, and that's why I'm saying about the Manny thing. I think he was saying that Jarrell said, like, it had been a year and nothing had come up about his missing brother. So I think his brother might have, like, the smallest time currently, that being, like, a year that we're aware of. But it's like, but later on at the end of the episode, he tells, like, tell Jarrell, Manny's okay, that it's not his fault or whatever. So I'm like, okay, okay, so what's your power? So far we have a healing factor, we have telekinesis. Part of me is wondering, like, is his thing telepathy? Could he read people's minds? Is that what that is? Because he's quiet the entire time, he doesn't speak, but it's probably because he's like, that's why I'm like, him and Mildred probably found out about their powers around the same time. It's like, oh, this is what I can do, what can you do? Oh, that's far out, man, type of thing, you know? So obviously, it's the beginning of a series, and once again, I'm coming into this blind. I kind of don't want to know anything from the original series, because there's probably an explanation of, like, not immediately, but because I think the original show ran for 3 seasons, so enough of that mystery was probably unveiled that it's kind of like, you know, this isn't like Charmed. Charmed, I was all over that. I was pretty familiar, I'd say pretty darn familiar with the original series. This is one of those cases of, like, no. I mean, for me, this is like Roswell, New Mexico. I've never seen the original Roswell series. My only experience is Roswell, New Mexico. So it's kind of that same vein of, like, I'm sure the answers are already out there because of the original show, but I don't want to know. I want to find out, figure this mystery out as things progress. Because I'm sure, because the show was canceled after its third season, so probably not everything was answered, or maybe a good chunk of stuff was. It's like your Lost and your Manifest type of thing of like, yeah, the point of a mystery show is to like spread the mystery out, like not get all the answers at once. Or maybe you do get all the answers pretty early on. It's just the aftermath past those answers of just like, you have 4,400 people with powers, the government not knowing what exactly to do to them. Obviously, you can draw like comparisons to like, the metahumans in the DC stuff. I'll say that specifically since this is the CW. This is all under like that Warner Brothers umbrella anyway. Or, like even they get referenced in this episode. It's like, LaDonna was like, oh, you're like the X-Men. It's like, the what? So it's like, yeah. So that's the more apt description. Because I don't know if metahumans in the DC universe ever like because the mutant situation in Marvel always ends up being a lot more of a heated thing than I ever feel like is with. I think it comes up. I mean, this is coming from someone who's only experienced it in TV shows. Like, I know it comes up maybe a tiny bit in the TV shows, but I feel like it never comes up as much as like the mutant situation does of like people being anti-mutant. Not too much. It probably the biggest example would be like Black Lightning, where like anti-metahuman comes up, but definitely doesn't come up much in The Flash or any other show. I mean, well, Supergirl had the whole anti-alien has an anti-alien aspect to it, but regardless, like I said, it's just a nice introduction. Just still so many questions, understanding what happened. Was this something alien? Was this something supernatural? Who knew what? Like, does Mildred know like fully what's going on, or like I said, did she just happen to discover her powers like Manny did like recently? So now that Keisha does know, she will most likely let Jarrell know, like, oh, I know where your brother actually is here. It's just no one knew any information because Jarrell happened to leave right before Manny came into the room. But also, no, I'm so stupid. That's not Manny. I'm so stupid now because he was like, Manny's okay. So that kid isn't, because I was like, yeah, no, because they definitely walk past each other. He's not Manny. It's most likely like I just know because he's probably going to be like, because I think there was a little girl in the original show that was like the centerfold of everything. Kind of like how, if you're familiar with Manifest, Cal is like the centerfold of everything. I think there was a little girl in the original show who was kind of the centerfold from what I remember, because if you look at some promotional there's like all the adults and then there's like one little girl kind of like at the like forefront. So like that's why I'm like, I think that little boy is playing that role a little bit. Of like, I think it is kind of what I thought. I think it is a telepathy thing of like, he knows what people are worried about, and maybe he has a connection that ties him into all of this, so he knows a little bit more what's going on. I don't know, he might be a centerfold of like why people have powers in the first place. He might know more than what's going on. So I have to kind of correct that. Like, I made it because I kept being like, him being like, oh, Manny's okay. I kept thinking like he is Manny, but it's like, no, of course, like him and Jarrell like walk past each other. Not unless it hasn't been, I feel like regardless of it, like if people look exactly the same as when they left. So if that was his brother, he would have noticed. So it's like, yeah, it's just him being like, yeah, I'm connected to, like, he's reading people's minds and letting people know. Either he just read Jarrell's mind as he was walking by, entering the room, but how would he know that Manny's okay? Because maybe he's like run into Manny who's here somewhere, or maybe it's just like he has a hive mind connection to the 4400 as a whole. That stuff like that is what I'm wondering. So, like I said, that's just kind of where my mind is currently. Just the first episode, so we'll ultimately have to wait and see where things end up taking us going forward to really see, well, what's going on. I'm excited to check the show out. Like I said, this being my first experience with the series and everything. So I'm excited to see where everything ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.